Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands from which we're broadcasting today. I'm broadcasting from the land of the Widjabul people of the Bundjalung Nation. We pay our respects to elders of the land, both past and present, and extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people attending today's webinar or watching the recording. Welcome to this Legal Aid New South Wales webinar, Assisting Energy Consumers Experiencing Vulnerability. My name is Bridget Barker and I work in the Community Legal Education branch at Legal Aid New South Wales. This webinar will go for about an hour and a quarter, although we may finish earlier than that. And there will be time for questions, as I've said. After the webinar, you will receive an evaluation survey and we do appreciate your feedback. You'll also receive an email with any resources that are referred to in today's presentation. Today's presentation is focused on the law in New South Wales. If you're joining us from another state, the law may differ. I'll now introduce you to our presenters. We have Mark Feather, General Manager, Strategic Policy and Energy Systems Innovation from the Australian Energy Regulator. Welcome, Mark. We also have Helen Ford, Deputy Ombudsman, Energy and Water Ombudsman New South Wales, or EWON. We also have Tamara White, Community Engagement and Dispute Resolution Officer from the Energy and Water Ombudsman of New South Wales. And I'll invite Mark to begin first with his presentation. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks very much, Bridget. Fantastic, slides working. Yeah, I'd just like to kick off as well with a small acknowledgement of country as well. I'd wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm presenting to you from today, and pay my respects to them and their cultures, elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to acknowledge and welcome any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are attending today's event. And I'm coming to you from Melbourne, the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. So thank you again for the invitation to present here today. I've got a few slides. I hope everyone can hear me okay. I was having a little bit of, Helen's nodding, that's good, that's reassuring. Yeah, so look, I'll just talk through my presentation. Last year, we put out a consumer vulnerability strategy towards energy equity, and that's the focus of today's presentation. I want to tell you about what the strategy includes and what its origins are and what we're trying to achieve through it. So maybe go on to the next slide. Thank you. So before we do that, I'm totally conscious that the energy sector is a bit opaque to many people. There are so many different market bodies and institutions that exist in the sector, and I thought I'd just give a bit of background to who the Australian Energy Regulator is to really kick off. So we operate in South Australia, Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria and Tasmania. We regulate the monopoly network businesses, you know, your poles and wires and gas pipeline businesses. We set their revenues every 5 years because they're monopolies. We also are responsible for the enforcement of the market rules in the energy sector, which is set out in the National Energy Rules for gas and electricity. We issue authorisations, which is sort of like licences for retailers to enter the market. And we set retail pricing price caps, which are known as the default market offer. And as I said, we do a lot of compliance and enforcement. So I'm the head of the policy area at the AER. So we have a small policy team that does a lot of advocacy around energy market reform in the energy transition. And we work with other people in the organisation to do that. Might move on to the next slide. Thank you. So we're a member, we're one of a number of institutions in the energy sector. There are a couple of others. So the Australian Energy Market Operator, which is responsible for operating the grid and the market, the wholesale market. They're known as AEMO. And sometimes they are referred to as the regulator, but they're not, they're the operator. So a different entity, they operate dispatch on the grid. We also have the Australian Energy Market Commission. They're based up in Sydney, and they're responsible for a lot of the policy that underpins the national energy markets. So they make the rules, and they have a market development responsibility, and they provide advice into government as well on the rules. And then sitting above us all are the energy ministers. So the energy ministers meet once every few months. They're meeting this month actually to really set the policy framework for energy. And the energy ministers really govern the laws for energy. So we've got the National Electricity Law, the National Gas Law, and we also have a National Energy Retail Law. And they are responsible for administering and making those laws, which we, as AEMO, AMC and the Australian Energy Regulator, we administer. And then off to one side is the Energy Security Board. So the Energy Security Board was created following the Finkel review after the South Australian blackout in 2015. And they're really responsible for oversight of reliability on the network as we go through the huge energy transition that we're going through at the moment that's going to take the next couple of decades. So that's us. I'd like to turn now to the core topic of vulnerability. So why are we focusing on vulnerability? So vulnerability, I don't know, maybe take a step back. When the energy markets were deregulated back in the early 2000s, there was always a kind of an assumption that creating an energy market with retail competition and generation competition would provide enormous benefits to all customers. And whilst many customers have benefited from it, there are a lot of customers who may be experiencing vulnerability or who are just plain disengaged from the market, who are not necessarily benefiting from it. Many of them experience vulnerability and are really struggling with it. And so whilst the original objectives of reform have met customer needs, in some cases, in a lot of cases, they haven't. And in the AER's view, the energy market has experienced, I would say, systemic failure in its approach towards treating and protecting consumers experiencing vulnerability. And look, energy is an essential service, and it's important that all consumers benefit from that essential service and are protected. The other thing to note is we're going through the energy transition, as I mentioned previously. The market is already crazy complex, and it's just getting even more and more complex with new technologies coming into the market. So we've got about, I think, 3 million customers in Australia who already have solar PV on their rooftops. Battery storage is starting to roll out. Electric vehicles are starting to roll out. There's much more of an emphasis now on distributed energy solutions. Previously, energy has been traditionally delivered by a bunch of big generators injecting electricity onto the grid. Retailers manage the risks and deal directly with the customers. That model, that centralised model, is really going through a transition to one that's becoming much more decentralised, where many consumers are taking much more of an active role through solar, batteries, and in the future, EVs. It's very complex, and there is a risk, we think, of creating an energy divide where consumers in the know get the benefit of all the technologies, but many consumers like renters, etc., or consumers that simply don't have the funds and the capital do not benefit from it and end up paying higher prices. But overall, we feel the energy system is just not working for all customers, particularly those experiencing vulnerability. So with all that in mind, we have a strategic priority. So the AR put its strategic priorities out at the end of 2020. And one of our strategic priorities is protecting vulnerable consumers while enabling participation in energy markets. And this is the strategic priority through which we've been working up our vulnerability strategy, too many words. Thank you. If we move to the next slide. Yeah, so we kicked off our work on vulnerability back in 2019 and 20, where we asked the Consumer Policy Research Centre, which is down here in Victoria, to explore regulatory regulatory approaches to vulnerability. And that was a really useful exercise. It came out with this, I suppose, this summary recommendation that all regulators in energy sectors should have a vulnerability strategy, and consumer vulnerability should be a priority issue for regulators. So what are some of the broad comments that the CPRC, as they're called, made? Vulnerability is increasing, and electricity and gas are essential services. So we need to think about customer outcomes in that space. And we need to ensure that the sectors are, I suppose, being inclusive and responsive to the individual circumstances of consumers. Not all consumers are the same. Many consumers experience vulnerability. For example, those consumers experiencing family violence, mental health, or just inequality of income. Anyone can become vulnerable as a consumer, and I think the lessons of COVID really brought that out. So vulnerability can be something that can be a transitional thing, and it can occur in response to unavoidable or unpredictable life events such as job loss or financial shocks, or even the death of a loved one. And of course, natural disasters, as we've been seeing increasingly lately. Importantly, and this goes to our definition of vulnerability, vulnerability can also be market induced. And so our definition of vulnerability is not only based on the individual characteristics of a person who may be experiencing vulnerability, it can also be influenced by just the sheer complexity of the market. And, for example, when you get your electricity or gas bill, that can be overwhelmingly complex and difficult to negotiate and navigate. And these kind of complexities and information asymmetries really reinforce and can contribute to vulnerability. CPRC also indicated that there's a lot of value in using human-centered design to understand the lived experience of consumers in informing regulation and regulatory measures to support consumers experiencing vulnerability. And lastly, vulnerability needs to be tackled at all stages of the customer journey. So it's when you're buying a product, it's through the use of that product. It's not just a one-off thing when you're buying a product. It's through the life of your energy consumption. So I might move, and data, last point there, also has an important role to play as well. How do we understand vulnerability? As I said, it's not only the individual circumstances such as low income, lived experience of disability, mental health, or being the victim of a domestic violence situation. It's also the characteristics of the energy sector and its products, such as complexity. And so in our Towards Energy Equity strategy, we've set out an all-encompassing definition that picks up on both of those components. Might move to the next slide. We undertook some lived experience consumer panel research that a business called Bastion Insights undertook for us, where they interviewed a number of consumers who are experiencing vulnerability in the sector. And it was a really useful exercise, and we've got quotes out of this research that we've put into our Towards Energy Equity document. So consumers experiencing vulnerability, as to the slide, they're worried about the changing market. Vulnerability can be highly individualized and highly bespoke. There is a stigma associated with vulnerability, and it can be very hard for consumers to ask for help even when faced with significant adversity. They don't want to be embarrassed. And so there is a significant avoidance, I think, of wanting to engage with retailers particularly. And as I said, complexity is a massive issue. Bills are too complex for many customers. I just thought it might be useful just to read a little letter out of the Bastion Insights panel research that we received from one of the consumers who was interviewed through Bastion. I'll just read it out to you quickly. It says, "Dear past self, don't be worried, ashamed, embarrassed if you need financial assistance in paying your bill. Phone them right now," that's your retailer. "Don't leave it till tomorrow, as you will just spend another night worrying when there is help at hand. Ring your electricity company, explain to them your situation, inform them that you are unable to pay your current bill. Not ringing them only brings more stress later on. Plus, you will get hit with a late fee." That's like a penalty fee. "Work out how much pay you have left after your expenses. If it is around $80, pay at least $20, as it is easier to go without something small than having to go without everything. Just don't be ashamed. Everything is fixable. Just ask, as you are worthy of help." So that's just one example of some of the useful input we got out of the Bastion Insights work. And, you know, this goes back to the point of having good consumer insights and inclusive design in informing our strategy. Next slide, please. We also note that the Melbourne Institute in December undertook a survey around vulnerability as well. And this slide just shows some of the core themes coming out of that. 1 in 5 Australians can't afford to heat or cool their home to a comfortable level. And that proportion is 4 times higher for those in financial stress compared to others. Half of those in financial stress are trying to reduce their energy bills by using less heating, cooling, hot water, etc. And we're also seeing people skipping meals or eating less to pay their energy bills. So the impacts are real and they're quite personal. Move on to the next slide, please. So just a bit of a background to this one. How are energy consumers protected in our existing framework? So we have the Australian Consumer Law that provides various guarantees, very high level. You know, thou shalt not undertake misleading conduct. There's protections against unconscionable conduct. There are guarantees around fitness for purpose and merchantable quality. And that is also supplemented, however, by the National Energy Customer Framework, which we administer. The National Energy Customer Framework is manifested in the National Energy Retail Rules. And these rules, they can get a bit complicated. They don't apply in Victoria. Victoria has its own energy retail consumer protection framework that's administered by the Essential Services Commission. And in all other states, so Tassie, South Australia, New South Wales, Queensland, we administer the NECF, as it's called, all the consumer protections. And there are protections in here governing life support customers, family violence, hardship customers. So retailers have obligations to identify customers on hardship and offer them payment plans if they are identified as falling into hardship. And also, importantly, there is a complaints and dispute resolution framework as well within the laws, with the Ombudsman offering and dealing with those dispute resolution processes. Next slide, please. What does the AER do to help protect consumers? We have a customer hardship policy guideline, which is a binding arrangement on retailers in relation to identifying consumers experiencing difficulties due to hardship, assisting customers help to better manage their bills effectively, including payment plans. Last year, we published a Better Bills guideline, which is really important. Bills are, as I said before, totally complicated. The AER now has a binding guideline that binds retailers to make sure they set out their bills in a clear and simple way, with core information on the front page, like how much are you due to pay, when do you need to pay it by, etc., and what are your dispute resolution mechanisms. So that's a recent development which should help. We also have a priority in relation to our compliance and enforcement arrangements around vulnerable consumers. So our compliance and enforcement priorities include the effective identification by retailers of residential consumers in financial difficulty and the offer of payment plans that have regard to the consumer's capacity to pay. And we have taken action of late in this space, with Origin receiving a $17 million penalty for failing to comply with their own hardship obligations. We have other roles in the sector that touch on vulnerability, including as I said before, we set the price caps for retail in South Australia, Queensland and New South Wales. So that's known as the default market offer. Might move on in the interest of time. I've got a couple more slides. So I want to just talk about the Towards Energy Equity strategy. We have five objectives in the strategy, and there's actions linked to each of these objectives, which I'd just like to linger on at the end of the presentation here. So objective 1, improve the identification of vulnerability. I think it's a real failure of the system and a real challenge, I think, for many retailers to actually do a good job in identifying those consumers who are experiencing vulnerability, particularly for staff in call centres. Given some of the stigma and some of the avoidance, it can be very difficult to identify these consumers and give them the help they need through payment plans, for example. We want to reduce complexity and enhance accessibility, which goes to the billing issues. We want to strengthen protections for consumers facing payment difficulty. We want to use the consumer voice and lived experience to inform regulatory design and change. And we also want to note that, cost to serve is a big issue for retailers, and we want to balance affordability by minimising overall cost to serve for retailers. So there are things we can do in the regulatory framework that can reduce their costs. So if we then go on to the next slide, which is the core actions, just to sort of highlight a few of these. The AMC put out a range of rules governing the treatment of consumers affected by family violence last year, and we have to ensure compliance with those rules. We're going to be working with retailers and consumers to develop a toolkit to help retailers identify consumers experiencing vulnerability, so we can get to these customers earlier so they're not building up debt. There are some interesting facts around debt. So consumer debt has been rising from, if you look at 21-22, from about $1,092 to $1,690, rising debt levels, and at a time when prices are going up. So it's really important that we actually identify these customers early on so that they don't get into the debt. And if the more debt they get into, the more likelihood there is that they could be disconnected at the end of the line. So getting to them early is important. On reducing complexity, as I said, we've implemented the Better Bills guideline. We're also looking at using retailer report cards as a bit of a reputational benchmarking exercise. So retailers' report cards can be used to report on their performance with respect to consumers experiencing vulnerability. How well do they do in terms of quality of service with these customers? And can we benchmark them in terms of their performance? We're also looking at improving consumers' outcomes for consumers in embedded networks. An embedded network can be a caravan park, it can be an aged care facility, it can also be a large apartment block. And I think about 1 in 11 customers in Australia is in an embedded network, and a lot of them experience vulnerability and don't get access to some of the core consumer protections. We want to strengthen protections for consumers facing payment difficulty as well. So we're going to be having a look at the existing hardship framework in the NECF, in the National Energy Customer Rules, to see if it's fit for purpose. And I note that the Victorian government has a slightly different scheme to our hardship scheme. It has a specific payment difficulty framework, and we want to have a look at that and see whether that can be applied in other states. We're going to be applying vulnerability impact assessments in our own work as well. So when we do a revenue determination or set a price cap, we want to understand how our own exercise of our own regulatory functions impacts on vulnerability. So we will be doing that. We're also doing a review of consumer protections for future energy services. So with the energy transition, as I said at the start, consumers are getting a much more wide range of new kinds of services and innovative offerings. And a lot of them pose a lot of risks to consumers experiencing vulnerability. We want to understand how we need to evolve our consumer protection framework for these new services. And then lastly, just on the right of that slide there, we've got advocate for sector-wide game changer reforms. This is a really big piece. As I said at the start, we think that the system is failing consumers experiencing vulnerability. And we believe that we really need some game-changing reforms in the space. And so we're looking at that as well with stakeholders. Find consumers early, but also spreading the cost and risks of vulnerability across the sector in a better way. But they're shared with other parts of the sector, including generators, networks as well, and government. So that's it. We hope to get to a number of outcomes. Barriers to consumers engaging in the market are reduced. We want consumers experiencing payment difficulty to receive effective and early tailored assistance. Our energy market is transitioning. We need to make sure that consumers are getting their needs sorted out in the energy transition. Just flip to the next slide, sorry. Just move to slide 16, which is the penultimate slide. I think maybe my connection's gone a bit slow there. That's okay. The last
Mark, yes, your voice is moving in and out.
Also just generally improving energy affordability, including reducing the cost to serve. And that's it, effectively. I might wind it up there.
Thank you, Mark. There was a little bit of connection difficulty towards the end of your presentation. I'm hoping that the audience was still able to hear. We do have...
I might leave it there. I think I've covered most of the content, so I'm conscious of the time.
Can you hear me, Mark? We have a couple of questions, but I can see that you might be experiencing some connection difficulties. We might come to Mark's questions for Mark at the end and hope that the connection is better at that point. I'd like to now welcome Helen Ford, Deputy Ombudsman from E1, to begin her presentation as part of our webinar today, and I'll just move forward for you, Helen.
Thank you, Bridget. Hope my connectivity has still got enough oomph in it so you can hear me clearly, Bridget. Is it okay?
I can hear you, Helen.
Excellent.
Yes, thank you.
So thank you for the invitation. We're very pleased to be here. Tamara White was introduced at the beginning as well, and Tamara is here. She's our Community Engagement and Dispute Resolution Officer who will help me with any curly questions if we get any at the end. So I'm the Deputy Ombudsman at E1, the Energy and Water Ombudsman New South Wales. We go to the next slide, Bridget. And I'm coming to you from Gadigal land of the Eora Nation here in the Sydney CBD. And I recognise their connection to land, waters and culture and continuing connection to these lands that we're working on. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of E1 in case anyone isn't familiar with us. We're the state-based energy and water ombudsman scheme for New South Wales. We have counterparts in Victoria, Queensland, and South Australia. And we were established in 1998. And very much as Mark said, we were a product of the deregulation of the energy market and were created at that time to give customers an independent, free and fair avenue to get disputes resolved if they couldn't fix them directly with their provider. And when we resolve complaints, we look at rules, laws and regulations, but importantly, we also look at what's fair and reasonable as well, that real ombudsman lens, that something could be lawful, but is it actually reasonable and fair, taking into account all of the circumstances? So we can consider and investigate complaints that are from residential customers, as well as from small business, and people can act on behalf of a customer with their consent. A community worker, an advocate, a family member acting as an advocate can actually raise a complaint with us on behalf of somebody. And that's quite an important part of our work. So I just wanted to look a little bit at the big picture to begin with. These sorts of figures about energy bills, debt, the really disturbing number of people in New South Wales who live below the poverty line, I'm sure are not news to many of you in the audience. And the economic environment that we're living in now is just going to expand the numbers of financially impacted people. And again, we're hearing the term working poor. We publish a quarterly report at E1 called E1 Insights that we publish on our website. And the most recent report there focuses on the sharp increase in complaints we're seeing that are really driven by the impact of price increases due to market volatility and some of the gas-specific issues. And you can find that on our website with lots of customer stories to actually illustrate what we're seeing. We could go to the next slide, Bridget. We've all been observing, I'm sure, the turmoil in the industry over recent times, the suspension of the energy market last June, the failure of some of the smaller providers with retailer of resort actions kicking in from the AER to transition customers from those providers to ongoing retailers. And obviously the significant energy prices that people are beginning to experience and that are forecast to continue to increase over the coming time. Prices, though, as Mark alluded to, are not the only change that is happening at the moment. There are lots of the new technologies and businesses that are on the next slide really are something that we're seeing at the moment. They're not future state. They're a very real thing for many customers already. There's the increase in embedded networks, private networks, apartment buildings, retirement villages, as well as residential parks. Electric cars, battery storage are all increasingly becoming part of the way customers receive their energy. And these aren't just early adopters. We received nearly 510 complaints in the last quarter that were from customers who own or use new technologies, and that's 11% of electricity complaints. So it's quite a significant number of people who already have got some of these new products and services. And most of the complaints we receive are linked in some way to the customer's retail bill or the supply from the network. We're working closely with the other Energy and Water Ombudsman schemes to really make sure that as those new products and technologies become more common, that our jurisdictions to actually help people with those complaints keep pace. We were established in the late 90s, as I said. Back then we had 8 members, very different environment to the one we've got now, and our jurisdictions were framed in that way. So we're doing a significant piece of work engaging with industry stakeholders, regulators such as the AER, to ensure that there's a focus on closing consumer protection gaps at the outset with these new technologies as they emerge. We now have relationships with the Clean Energy Regulator, the Clean Energy Council, that we certainly didn't have 18 months ago. And we're working with fair trading because they obviously have some jurisdiction to help with some of these products as well. But we're very conscious that for customers, most customers want a simple journey if they have a problem, and being told there are a number of places they need to go, or that there might be no resolution to a particular problem, is not going to be satisfactory down the track. So we're really keen that access to independent dispute resolution is built in from the get-go to a lot of these new products and services. So what are we seeing at E1? These figures here are actually from our 21-22 report, annual report, and things are kind of changing, but I'll take you through what we were seeing as of June last year. So our complaints were down, as you can see, and that's still really the lingering benefits of the AER's statement of expectations, which really up the ante for providers about protecting energy consumers from disconnection, debt collection and credit listing. So that's beginning to recede now, but as you can see there, obviously most retailers actually did pretty well at supporting customers. The top primary issues were billing, customer service and credit, which is fairly constant for us year on year. And you can see there that most complaints are about electricity, just under 20% are around gas, and water comes in at 5%. And I will talk a little bit about water later on. But those numbers are beginning to change. You can see in the next slide that complaints are beginning to trend upwards. Increased cost of living and energy prices that I've already talked about. Also, the ongoing impacts of floods, of natural disasters. So the floods in New South Wales, Lismore, Forbes, Parkes, Dubbo, Menindee. In the July to September period last year, we received a 58% spike in high bill complaints. So quite a different trajectory to the one we were seeing up until the end of June last year in the annual report. That slowed a little bit in October to December, but it still went up by a further 16%. So things are definitely beginning to change. Just talking particularly around the floods, and I'm guessing some of you on the webinar might actually have very direct experience of living or supporting people who are in those communities. The AER issued a letter of expectation to energy retailers about how to respond and support flood-affected customers. Despite an overall positive response, we're still taking complaints from customers where their homes and lives have been devastated, and some are receiving estimated bills for properties that were uninhabitable. And the basis for the estimates is not appropriate. So we really would encourage customers to reach out to us, or for you to contact us on their behalf, because there's quite a long tail on this. We completely understand that energy and connectivity would not be top of mind in a flood. Finding shelter, getting an income, making sure everyone's safe, shelter and income are going to come first. But as people are beginning to move back into homes, we realise that some of these complaints have been a little bit hidden. So we would really encourage people to reach out to their retailer or to reach out to us. Could have the next slide, please. Thank you. I wanted to talk a little bit about our systemic issues work. We have all of that rich complaints data based on the evidence from customer stories. And we have a number of other functions in addition to resolving complaints at E1, including identifying and resolving systemic issues. And we also use that data to inform evidence-based submissions to some of the consultations that Mark talked about. So the Better Bills guideline, the development of that, we used a lot of the data from our complaints work to actually demonstrate to the AER what we saw as the things that didn't work as well as they could have. Supporting that with direct customer stories to really bring to life some of those issues. And on the next slide, you can also see that there are little photos there from our lovely graphic designer of our E1 Insights reports that we put out every quarter publicly. And we share those very actively with the regulators, government departments and other decision makers to really help inform evidence-based policy. We also produce a series of reports called Spotlight On reports. We only do them quite sparingly, 2 or 3 a year. And we really focus on those wicked policy problems that are hard to solve. We don't pretend there's a magic bullet solution or that we know all the answers, but by sharing what we see from customer experience, we really try and get those items firmly on the agenda. We've been delighted recently, we did a spotlight on early last year or even the year before now, that was about the challenges of people who live in embedded networks, so commonly apartment buildings, retirement villages, who get their hot water through a centralised hot water system. For complex reasons I won't go into here, there are some significant consumer protection gaps for some of those customers, and they're only growing because of the increase in embedded networks and the way they're being installed in new buildings. This was one of those gaps where it sat between national, state regulators. It was difficult for them to have visibility of the problem. We used our Spotlight On report to really explain what the problem was. And then we convened a series of workshops with all of the relevant decision makers. It's been a long, slow burn, as you can tell, but very recently in a response, their response to the New South Wales parliamentary inquiry into embedded networks, we're delighted that the New South Wales Office of Environment and Climate Change has actually responded saying it will basically put in effect some of the things we had developed in those workshops. They're going to put out a statement of expectations from the state government, actually really encouraging that hot water in those settings is billed in the underlying energy units, which means that the consumer protections would be available to those customers. So we will keep putting out those spotlights, and I'd really encourage you to have a look. You can sign up to receive alerts when one comes out on our website. Just wanted to give another example, and Mark also mentioned this case when he talked about the AER's regulatory priorities. We, at the request of the AER, all of the Energy and Water Ombudsman report to the AER instances where we've raised something with members, but we don't get the response we're hoping, and we think that there may be a serious underlying issue that isn't being addressed. The work that the AER did in taking enforcement action against Origin Energy in relation to its way it was delivering its hardship program actually was informed heavily by complaints to E1 and complaints to EWOSA, our sister organisation in South Australia. We had realised, looking at our data trends, that over about a 14-month period, the number of complaints we were receiving that related to Origin's hardship program was very significantly higher as a percentage than all of the complaints around other providers' hardship programs. And we realised something was amiss from what we could see in the customer stories. So we alerted the AER to what we were seeing. The AER then went and did its own investigations, of course, and that resulted in the $17 million fine and remediation, which was, of course, very important because 90,000 customers were found to have been affected, and there was significant work required to actually try and make good for some of those customers as well. And a really significant piece of work by the AER, really making it clear the importance of very genuine engagement with customers for all retailers with their hardship programs, and that automation can't replace a really good engagement with individual customers. I just wanted to depart a little bit into a story about water as well, because we do have a water jurisdiction with the Energy and Water Ombudsman New South Wales. We don't have complete coverage of the state, though, because council water providers don't have to be members. But we take an expansive view of our jurisdiction, and we became aware of very significant water billing problems for water customers of some community housing and Aboriginal community housing organisations. And this came about because of our outreach program, that our outreach team were continuously hearing from customers who had water bills they didn't understand. They were just getting very, very minimal information from their community housing provider about what water charges they had to pay. And this was leading to debt and confusion and all sorts of problems. So our policy team had a look at what was behind this, and we realised that the guidance given to community housing providers about how to bill for water was really quite deficient. It all sat in a ministerial guideline. So we did an extensive piece of stakeholder engagement, first of all with DCJ, the New South Wales Government Department that was the owner of the master guideline. And then we did another piece of work with the Aboriginal Housing Office. And we're really pleased in the last quarter of last year that a new guideline has been published that adopted all of the changes that we suggested. And now the guideline really does give community housing and Aboriginal community housing tenants the right to have water bills that contain similar amounts of information to that required if you're a Hunter Water or a Sydney Water customer. So a really important improvement, because I think, as we all know, if customers don't have access to information about what they're using and the basis for costs, it's really difficult for them to seek help if there's a problem, and just to budget in any transparent way. So in ending, I wanted to talk about some positives as well, because Mark and I'm sure, definitely want you to go away from this webinar knowing that there are things you can do to help those that you work with in the community. Mark talked about the AER's towards energy equity strategy, which we certainly see as a very key piece of work. Our Ombudsman, Janine Young, is actively involved as a member of the Game Changer working groups that are working on that initiative that's really trying to look at what are some things that haven't been tried before that could really move the dial, in addition to those really important other measures that Mark went through earlier. Really trying to ensure that customer voices and experience are really taking into account in looking at some forward-thinking solutions. In addition to that work that's happening right now, energy retailers all have to have affordability programs. Our preferred word for hardship programs, which really not a great term, and I know everyone's moving away from that. Please, what E1 will do, if customers contact us, we can help with accessing those programs, negotiating affordable payment plans, preventing disconnections, and providing rebate and concession information. And on the next slide, there's a lot of detail about rebates that are available. I won't go through all of those. They do all have obviously entry requirements, but if you jump on our website, we've got fact sheets there that go through in detail the eligibility requirements and how you go about applying for any of those products. And if a customer contacts our office, one of the things our dispute resolution staff will do is go through to check whether they are getting all the rebates they should. And finally, I just wanted to talk about how we work with financial counsellors, because I know some of you on the call are financial counsellors. We've got a no wrong door approach. So if a customer comes to us and we're in fact not the right place, we will refer them. And we refer a significant number of customers to financial counsellors. And we really encourage financial counsellors to refer people to us as well. We've been continuing to contribute to the Department of Social Services consultation about a funding model to ensure sectors such as banking, telcos, energy and water all contribute appropriately to funding financial counselling services so that customers can continue to access those really important resources. And in closing, I just wanted to emphasise really when it would be very helpful potentially for you to refer clients to E1. We've got expertise in resolving complaints with energy and water providers, which would free up valuable time for financial counsellors to focus on other issues that customers might be experiencing. As I talked about, we look at both helping with an individual complaint, but we do really value those stories to inform the bigger picture. And the richer the stories, the better the picture is we can paint to the wider regulatory community. And it really helps us identify systemic issues and be able to share that information with those who can really move the dial on some of those policy settings. So that's it from me, and very happy to take questions about anything that I've talked about. Thank you.
Thanks very much to both Helen and to Mark for those really informative presentations. I'm not sure if it's me that's had the technical difficulties. I hope that the information has been readily available to everybody who's joined us in the webinar today. Mark, we did have a couple of questions that came in towards the end of your presentation, so I was hoping that you might be able to address those now, if possible.
Yeah, sure.
The first question was, why are energy prices more expensive on the East Coast than in Western Australia?
That's an expansive question. Yeah.
May not be something you can answer.
Yeah, there's a lot that sits underneath that question. I think in the short answer is, I think we're seeing a lot of changes in the electricity wholesale market at the moment, as we're seeing the impacts of the war in Ukraine have been pushing up black coal and natural gas prices on the East Coast. And the East Coast coal markets and gas markets are linked to international prices. And those price effects have been particularly significant and have had upward pressure on wholesale prices for electricity, particularly because electricity generators use black coal, and they also use from time to time gas as well. Those factors are also compounded by the fact that a lot of our coal-fired generators are becoming increasingly unreliable as they move towards closure. They're very old power stations, and they can have prolonged periods of shutdown, which also reduces the supply to the market. So one action that has been taken to address that, of course, is the gas and coal price caps that the federal government have put in place, and we're now seeing some downward pressure on those prices directly as a result of those actions, and we've seen those here at the AER. I'm less familiar with the WA market, but I know that the WA market has a capacity mechanism, for example, and I'm not sure how as exposed they are to those international price variations. That would be my short answer, Bridget.
Thanks very much, Mark. That's a very comprehensive answer for a very broad question. There's another question which isn't directly on the content of your presentation, but an inquiry as to whether AER hires legal graduates, and if AER does, whether there are any particular requirements. I would say I could email that answer later, but the question was asked anonymously, so I can't contact the person directly with an answer.
No, that's all good, Bridget. Short answer is yes, we do. We have a graduate program. 30 years ago, a long time ago, I came into the ACCC at the start of my career. I've now come back to the AER, but I was originally part of the graduate program. So there is a graduate program that the ACCC and the AER run. But I can provide separate details about that if you'd like, and I can pass them on, Bridget.
Okay, I'll just ask the attendee to perhaps email CLE webinars at legalaid.nsw.gov.au, and I can share that email with Mark, and Mark can then provide you with the information directly.
Bridget, no one has asked me this question, but can I volunteer some information?
I was going to turn to you next, Helen. Thank you.
We don't have a legal graduate program. This is just a shameless plug. We are at the moment recruiting for an Aboriginal community engagement officer to join our fabulous outreach team. So we would really welcome people promoting it through our networks. It's being advertised in all the usual places, and we're working with the AES in Redfern as well. So yeah, it's a fabulous team, a really great program, and we are looking for enthusiastic applicants.
That's great. Join a Legal Aid webinar and find out about job prospects, everybody. We don't have any further questions. I'll just check with the audience whether there are any other questions you'd like to raise whilst we have both Helen and Mark still with us. And I should also, sorry, excuse me, Mark, you go.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say I didn't get to touch on the game changer piece much at all due to my reception difficulties, for which many apologies. I'm happy to touch base on that briefly if you like as well.
Certainly, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean the game changer piece, which is action 15 in our vulnerability strategy, and as Helen acknowledged, is a really important piece. With Janine engaging in that as part of our design group and leadership team, we're really looking at systemic reform on vulnerability here, and there's all sorts of ideas and concepts that have been floated through our design group and our leadership group process, including things like a shared funding pool. Some have characterised it as an energy trust, but a pool in which different parts of the sector can feed funds into the pool, and then that pooled set of funds can then be deployed to different ranges and different purposes to help consumers experiencing vulnerability. Disconnections are being looked at. Do you ban disconnections? That may be challenging, or do you set up a disconnection tribunal so that customers are better protected through the disconnection stage. I think banning disconnections, I think, may be problematic, because then you get into these challenging issues of how do you kind of identify the customers who can't pay from the customers who do not want to pay, and there are challenges there. And we're also looking at a concept of a centralised service body, which could provide an all-encompassing service to consumers experiencing vulnerability as well. So a service that would serve their very bespoke or individualised needs and can point them to government support, can point them to hardship programs, can help manage their debt and get them fixed up at an earlier stage so that they avoid disconnection. So there's a lot of ideas. Social tariffs are also being considered. A lot of ideas in there. So it's been a great discussion, and we're looking at hopefully pulling together some recommendations for energy ministers in the middle of the year on that. It's really important initiative.
It is. It's very interesting, and it's great to see so many creative ideas being put forward.
Yeah, it's been fascinating. It's been good. Absolutely.
Okay, we have had a question just come in. What recommendations would you have for a client who is in public housing and has high energy consumption needs due to a medical condition, including air conditioning to regulate body temperature, but cannot afford their bills?
Should I take this one, Helen?
Would that be all right with you, Mark?
Yeah,
Can we throw this to Tamara?
Thanks, Tamara.
So there are medical rebates that can be applied to your bills. You do need to fill out, essentially take a form. Well, customers need to have a form filled out by their doctor that is then provided to their energy retailer, and then the appropriate rebate is applied to their bills, which gives them a certain discount off their bills depending on what's required. But in terms of recommendations around that and what is accessible for customers experiencing that, if they're in housing, there's the low income household rebate, there's the medical rebate, and also there's all of the variety of different sort of hardship options that retailers offer, bill smoothing plans, options around not having to pay your bill all at once, or paying them in advance and then getting discounts for being a consistent, making consistent payments. So there are certainly options available. And all of that information is also on our website. So it's in the fact sheets around high bills and affordability.
That's great. Thanks so much, Tamara. I just wanted to let the audience know that I uploaded a copy of the presentation into the chat. So hopefully you've all seen that and can download it, but I will also provide a copy by email following the webinar. And it doesn't look as though we've just had another question. Thank you. From Paul at the Tenants Union. Where can we locate the AER letter of expectation in regard to estimated bills for properties that were rendered uninhabitable during flood events?
I can take that one away if you like and find out the location of that and come back to you, Bridget.
Thank you. I'll share Paul's email with you. There's another question, a comment that the AER communication on human energy and electricity embedded networks in residential land lease communities was very useful.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many issues around embedded networks. It's so hot that you could spend hours talking about the challenges facing customers on embedded networks, but no, that's good feedback.
Yes, I know that Paul works with tenants across New South Wales living in land lease communities and residents in land lease communities. So I'm sure Paul would have appreciated that information. So I'll just do a last call out for any further questions from our participants today. If something occurs to you later, of course, you can send an email to CLE webinars, which is on your screen now, that email address at legalaid.nsw.gov.au. And I will attach a copy of the presentation to an email to everybody who registered for the webinar today. And I'll also provide a link to the fact sheets that Tamara and Helen referred to as well. And so I would like to finish by thanking Helen and Mark. Really appreciate you coming on board and sharing this valuable information with our community worker subscribers today. And thanks, Tamara, for jumping in to assist with the questions. So there's no further questions. We'll end the webinar now. Thanks, everybody, and good morning to all our participants.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bridget.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.